Did we do well, my darling girls? Did we really do well? We grew you up to be straight and strong, to do your best to know right from wrong.
So welcome to this, our second Objectinar. We had a great time last time on porn with Professor Kathleen Richardson and Dr. Julia Long, when we had 104 people from 13 countries and really enjoyed the experience. Women's Human Rights Commission for the use of their Zoom today, much appreciated. And I'd like also to thank Rebecca from the Resistors, who is my wonderful techspert, who will sort out anything that goes wrong. So today's topic is living with an autogynephile man. And you might like to ask yourself, why is it that autogynephiles are always men? Is there an equivalent for women? No, there isn't, I'll tell you that. So maybe you'd like to suggest answers to that question, either during on the way through if it occurs to you, or at the end. I've got my own ideas as to why this might be. So today we've got two brave women sharing their personal experiences of living with an autogynephile man. They've had a very hard time. They probably don't want suggestions as to what they might have done if they'd only thought about it. They have managed to move on from it. I won't say from having talked to them in some depth that they put it behind them. I'd say it's a kind of experience that you're processing to some extent for the rest of your life. But they have both moved on and had professional and personal success and found better relationships. We'll be recording this session for the first hour, and around 4 o'clock we'll take a short break, turn off the video, and we can just then have a group chat. The speakers may choose to leave, and in which case that's fine, and we can have a group discussion for the last half hour or so. As you know, Object campaigns on 5 key issues which all involve objectification of women and exploitation. They are pornography, prostitution, strip joints, surrogacy, and transgenderism. And we like to focus on the links between the issues, which is where single issue campaigns, wonderful as they are, can fall down. And if it's like, you know, knocking down Skittles. If you miss one, another one can pop up while you're waiting. We need to be able to tackle these things, all of them. So today's topic, autogynephilia, links 4 out of our 5 topics, and we'll hope to focus on those links to some extent. Practicalities: if you ask a question, please remember to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. We don't need to see you, but we'd like to hear you if you'd like to ask one. A little bit about the history of Object. Object was founded in 2008 by Dr. Sasha Rakoff to fight the objectification of women in the media. They were successful, I must say I was involved then. We got the law changed on prostitution. We got lads mags plastic wrapped and on the top shelf, which in those pre-internet days was quite a success. Object was closed down in 2015 by the then paid chief executive Ros Hardy. £36,000 disappeared from the bank account and the contents of the office was stolen. It was quite hard to get over that, but as I had been on the board before, I was able to restart it in 2016, and we widened our brief at that point into the new issues of objectification, which were surrogacy and transgenderism. So objectification is still our main concern, with women being used as objects, as instruments, as props, as resources, and as things to exploit, things being the operative word. But we had 2 successes on pornography last year. We got the Porn Star Cocktail renamed the Passion Star Cocktail by Marks and Sparks, and we got the London Porn Film Festival moved out of London. We like to collaborate. We're a very small organisation, but because we're unfunded, we can say what we like, and we like to work with all our sister groups, and we do. So, moving on to living with an autogynephile partner. Autogynephilia is from the Greek. Auto means self, gyne means woman, and philia means love. So it just sounds like somebody who loves themselves as a woman. If only that were true. It's defined as a fetish or a paraphilia. The AGP, it's often called AGP for short, doesn't, as many people think, exist as a little sideline alongside an otherwise normal partner relationship. It's not just a bit of dressing up on the side. In fact, the opposite is true. The main and all-consuming relationship for an autogynephile man is with himself acting as a woman. it's the apparent partner relationship that is the minor sideline in his world, though of course he doesn't admit that at the start. Autogynephiles regularly seem to find another partner to exploit immediately a relationship ends. And a lot of young lesbians are also, with the two women that we're going to hear from today, were in heterosexual relationships with these guys, but a lot of them in their role as women prey on young lesbians at the moment. An autogynephile is completely, totally and utterly preoccupied with gaslighting not just their poor ostensible partner, but the whole of society, who must stop what they're doing and pay attention to him, join in the pretense that he's a woman, and fit in with his completely stereotyped and often pornified idea of what a woman is and should be. Autogynephilia involves a total lack of empathy with real women and the problems of being a woman, and a total preoccupation with his woman act. So it's misogynistic and it's 100% self-focused. Autogynephilia doesn't usually exist in isolation. It is accompanied by other forms of abuse, such as financial abuse, secrecy, porn use, controlling behavior, pressure to agree to unwanted forms of sex, absenteeism, either emotional or actual. A lot of them spend a lot of time working away from home in areas where there's no phone signal, and general failure to take responsibility for home and family. So partners have a huge amount to contend with. It's not just a bit of cross-dressing. And the absolute icing on the cake, when autogynephile partners reach out for support, all the agencies they might contact have all drunk the trans Kool-Aid and will say that the partner is the one who must accept and adapt. And that this man who likes to project himself as a woman is absolutely fine. So the poor old AGP partner gets gaslighted all over again. So that's just a bit of scene setting. Wanted to make it clear that this is about the experience of women living with a man like that. We're not that interested in what it's like to be an autogynephile. So I'd like to introduce Abigail Rowland first of all. Abigail spoke out some time ago for the first time about this, and had a long experience with an autogynephile man, and put a lot of effort into trying to help him before finding out the true nature of his behaviour. So Abigail, casting your mind back perhaps a long way, because it's quite nice to see how the vulnerabilities arise, could you tell us a little bit about your childhood and your growing up, and what sort of values were seen as important where you grew up?
Okay, yeah, I grew up in an ordinary working class family, not particularly religious, but with a lot of emphasis on caring and helping others. For example, my parents fostered many children. Some of these were very disadvantaged children. So the idea of helping people was something that I learned very young. I had a grammar school education because I was groomed and sadly abducted by an older man just before the age of 14. I also suffered some pretty nasty male violence. He shot me in the eye. It seems ridiculous to say this now, but you have to remember this is a long time ago, that not much was said about it. I think the people in my family took the view that it was least said, soonest mended, and people in the community and people in the establishment did an awful lot of victim blaming. So I went into my late teen years as a very introverted young woman.
And traumatized.
Pretty traumatized, yes. But because I was successful academically, and nobody really thought that I probably needed any more support, and I was just quiet. So I believe very strongly that damaged girls and women become targets for for future abusers, and that partly this is an issue of women having very low self-esteem, and partly it seems to me that it's almost as though they're able to pick these women out. It's still, I think that until I was 50, I probably went through life with some kind of badge on me that these men are able to read. And when I was 50 and I began to deal with it myself, it was like taking that badge off. And I returned to a more healthy state. But I do believe that a history of abuse leads to more abuse of the same kind or of different kinds.
Yeah, well, they do say that even if you've had awful difficulties in your life, it's what you're used to, and you will seek it out again, don't you? Whether consciously or not. Right. Thank you very much.
So that's my answer.
So wow. And did you like to take us up from the post-adolescence period to the time when you first met the autogynephile man that you became involved with?
Well, yes. I mean, I used to joke that I've got the world's worst taste in men, and I kind of went from one disastrous relationship to another, encountering different types of abusive men, more or less serious. I mean, I've been involved with a man who was a serial affairs, a violent drinker. He, interestingly enough, I see now, was an amputee. So he had a lot of anger issues himself, and he hooked me in by using my caring background as a weapon. And I'm afraid I have to be honest, it's embarrassing for me, you know, as an intelligent woman to have to say this, but if I put my hand on my heart now and look back, I can see very clearly that every good instinct that I internalized as a child, every desire to help people and be kind to people, has been used against me by men in various situations, culminating in my AGP partner. Which
I don't think you need to be embarrassed, Jackie, because I think that, you know, a lot of us have had some share of that. And when you socialise girls to be nice, helpful, and kind, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're looking at the queen of that.
You might have competition there.
I can't.
And I remember you saying a Catholic background, so you had that the Catholic guilt thing as well, and the Catholic compulsion to.
My AGP came from a Catholic family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there was a religious kind of element in it.
And of course, women are the virgins or whores in a lot of religious cultures, aren't they?
Yeah.
Great, thanks very much. So you had a career. You were working?
Yes, but well, by the time I met my AGP, I was head of English in a large comprehensive school.
Wow.
And I had left my abusive drinker for some time. I had no problems really. I had a house. I'd been through a difficult time, but I had a house. I had no financial problems. I had a good job. My daughter was being cared for with the support of my own mother, so I was managing that. Everything in the garden was rosy at that time.
Up to that point. This podcast was very having got you to that point. Signals of you know what was to come, and we'll move over to Jackie. Jackie Mearns is based up in Scotland. I know some of you know Jackie. And I'd like to ask you the same thing, Jackie. You know, tell us a little bit about how it was for you growing up, your childhood, your adolescence, and the values that were imparted to you about what was important in life.
Hello.
Hello.
I grew up in a lone parent household. There was me, my little younger sister, my mum and my grandmother lived with us until I was about 12 or 13. And so I didn't really have any experience of men. We were really not very well off at all, and we lived in like a very kind of rough housing scheme. And my mum was not religious, but she liked the church, you know, and she liked the kind of moral guidance that the church gave. And I don't know what had happened in her younger years to make her how she was, but she was very judgmental and had very strict, you know, ideas about what was right and what was wrong. There's nothing wrong with that in itself, but I felt sometimes, I never felt I was good enough, and I always felt whenever I got into trouble or like something had happened to me, it was always a case of oh well, you brought it on yourself, you know. So I learned very early not to ask for any kind of help or anything like that.
It doesn't sound very supportive to you as a...
No, it wasn't very supportive. And she would accuse me of things that I hadn't done, or sort of say I had motives that weren't there. Like, and she was like, she would often call me like a wee whore, you know, slut. Or,
really?
yeah, and I didn't have a very happy childhood.
No, clearly not. No.
And there was no sort of men around, so like that wasn't, you know, I didn't know much about men. However, my mum kind of idolized men. Anyway, when I was about 12, my mum met this man, and for whatever reason, she wanted him to move in. And my grandmother moved out, and my grandmother was really she was my source of nurturing and love, really. And anyway, this man moved in, and he would sexually molest me. But because we weren't allowed to talk about sex or anything like that, even if people were kissing on the television, my mum would like, turn that off, you know. So sex was like, ugh. Even though I could hear my mum and this man having sex in the next room to us, because we lived in a very small flat. It was all very kind of confusing about this. But anyway, I felt I couldn't tell my mum, because then she would know that I knew something about sex, and I'd always been blamed for everything in the past. So I just thought, well, she's not going to help me. She's going to blame me. And, you know, she puts him above me anyway. So I was quite clever at school. So I decided that education would be my only way out. I was bullied at school. I had very few friends, and just for being a swot, and for like not having nice clothes, whatever, you know, children choose to pick on someone for. So anyway, so sort of moving into adolescence, I was quite lonely. I was bullied. I only had one friend, but I had decided that, like, you know, I'm quite clever. I can get out of the situation, like, through education. So I did really well at school, but I dropped out my final... It's
a long time to get on a secondary school.
It's a long time. Yeah.
I say it's a long time to be unhappy and to feel...
Yeah.
I have no friends or only one.
Yeah, I felt it was like really, you know... Yeah, anyway. At the time, that was just normal for me, but thinking back, I wasn't a happy young person. Anyway, so then I fell out with my only friend in my final year at school, and I dropped out. And on the one hand, although I would get praised for getting good marks at school, my mum was always of the mind, like, who do you think you are going to university there? That'll never happen to you. So anyway, so I dropped out of school before I finished all my exams. And I started nursing, which I wasn't really cut out for, really. And to cut a long story short, I dropped out of that and eventually did go to university in another town, and that was my means of escaping my roots, my mum, basically.
And did it get better for you being away from home?
Well, because I had been so controlled as a child, I had no boundaries. You know, I had no way of knowing what was good for me, what was bad for me, and you know, so I had a couple of like relationships, I suppose, that didn't really kind of work out, and they were just like kind of idiots. Anyway, but then I met the man that's the father of my children, who's not the AGP, by the way, and he was kind of quiet and gentle, and he didn't give me any bother. I ended up drifting into marrying him, and we had 2 children together, and then I had a kind of I went through a period of where I felt I had everything. I had a relationship where he wasn't taking the piss out of me. We bought a house together. I had 2 children, but I felt, and I had a job that I really liked.
What job were you doing then?
A community worker.
Oh yeah.
So, but there was something kind of like, I felt kind of empty inside. I felt like, that there was something unfulfilled. And so then we went through a very kind of, not loveless exactly, but just an empty marriage,
It's not.
Have I gone too far in my story? I'm not sure.
No, that's absolutely fine. No.
So that's kind of like, so that was the sort of point I was at when I first met this man.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that's the point that we got to with Abigail. So quite a lot of difficulties, really. As women, it's basically we are the oppressed sex. We do have difficulties. Most women have difficulties of one kind or another. And this is the point at which you meet the person you later find out is an autogynephile. So moving back to Abigail again then, please. Would you like to tell us how it started?
Okay. Interesting overlap with Jackie, actually, because he presented at first as being very gentle, very, very interested in me, which I wasn't used to. That was exactly the right way to get to me. I wasn't used to being treated as having any importance. He wasn't at all pushy or demanding. Quite the reverse. He wasn't sexually demanding, which was extremely important because I read that as respect and consideration. Again, I hadn't used to that. He encouraged me to talk about my past and my problems, and he was very sympathetic. And then he confided in me, a series of stories about his own past, which broke my heart, really. And I really felt sorry for him, and I really began to feel that he'd actually had a worse time than I had. Of course, this was before I realized that he was such an amazingly accomplished liar that that he could convince anybody of anything, and he would say anything to anyone to get his own ends. So I didn't know that at the time. So he groomed me into believing this version of himself, and my family and friends initially, who all thought he was charming. Were there signs right at the beginning? Yes, there were, but I didn't see them right at the beginning. It's only when I look back now I can see what seem to be now like bloody great signposts saying, beware, creepy man. But at the time, I didn't have the knowledge to interpret them. I'm actually writing about these signs now.
Would you like to tell us what they were with hindsight?
Well, yeah, I can give you 1 or 2 examples that relate to what you said earlier. At one point, we did come across his ex, I actually saw her. I met her in the street, and my God, now I realise that she was an absolute mess. And I mean, but he told me that she was a drinker, and that it was her fault that everything had done, because she was well on her way to become. When I saw her, I could believe that. She looked as though she had a serious drinking problem. But that was before I knew that apart from her, there were at least 2 other women whose lives he'd wrecked before he got round to mine.
Right.
And I feel really guilty about that now, because that I thought bad thoughts about that woman. And she, if I'd had only seen what was there in front of me, I was looking at myself in many ways. A few years on, the first time he took me to his apartment, that was one sign. But the very first time he took me to where he was living, which was over his shop, hanging on the wall in the attic was a bright red kimono, and it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. There was nothing else but going into this dingy apartment loft and seeing this thing on the wall. I said, that's beautiful, that's lovely. And he sort of dismissed it as being something that he was selling. But of course I realized now it wasn't. So I've written a whole poem about that kimono. And that's how I'm working my way through the signs. They were there, but I didn't see them at the time because he didn't want me to see them, and I didn't have the knowledge to be able to see them. Or if I thought something was odd, I didn't have the knowledge or the confidence to make sense of it.
Right. I think it's very important to carry on processing these things as long as necessary, isn't it? You know, all these things about put it behind you and move on. It's not realistic and not helpful. Right, so that was a couple of signs. So I haven't quite worked out why the kimono was a sign. Can you, I'm a bit slow, can you spell it out to me?
Well, because when jumping ahead, when I did find out about the full extent of his activities, and I actually broke into a premises of his, I found thousands of pounds worth of women's clothes. He wasn't, the one thing I will say about him is he wasn't a cheapskate. Everything that he bought was extremely expensive, right. Top quality. Spent a lot of money on his obsession.
Right.
So that kimono in my consciousness stands for everything that he spent and did in pursuit of his obsession.
Right. So how did it come about that you found out in the relationship about his autogynephilia?
It took a long while for me.
How many years? Give us an idea.
7, 8 years.
Okay.
He was extraordinarily clever at telling lies, covering himself, and also I mean, I had a career. I think I thought to myself, look, here we are, we're both, we're not youngsters in the first flush of youth. We both have things that we have work, and we have careers, business pursuits. I can't expect this person to change their whole life and become Mr. Family Man overnight. So I pursued my career, which it sort of took me, I had a lot of responsibilities, a lot of work hours, and I didn't put him under too much pressure because I believed that he was working in various businesses that he had. And he did have these businesses. What I didn't realize were that they were really a cover for his activities in autogynephilia and in pornography, because he was up to his neck in the porn industry.
Right. And how did you find out about that?
How did I find out? Well, over a period of time, he explained away a lot of his moodiness and his unpleasantness and his absenteeism. He would go away for days at a time by saying that he suffered from depression. So again, brilliant strategy. I think I must have read every book that was ever published on male depression. And, you know, I tried to help, let's talk about this. And he would just reject me out of hand. So eventually things got so bad that I began to feel that there must be more to it. Then I had usual story, missed calls on his phone. He would never leave his phone unattended. Wrong numbers on our landline. People ringing up and asking for the same name, not his name, but the same name, which was a feminized version of his name. But still, I didn't really think that. I got to the point where I knew that he was involved with certain people. I knew that he had relationships with some women. Usually they were women with very big breasts. He had a thing about that. And I think what I thought was that he was having an affair. In my innocence and having read too many romantic novels, perhaps, I thought, oh, he's having an affair. I tried to talk to him. He denied everything. In the end, I had to do a lot of detective work. So I spent about 6 weeks following up, measuring his mileage, checking his gauge, checking his stories. And I concluded in the end that he, so I knew that he had a storage facility near where I lived, and it suddenly came to me in an epiphany that the answer to all my problems was in that place. So one day, when he was busy, I stole his keys, and I drove down to the place, and on the way down, I can remember thinking, oh dear, I'm going to find a message on his phone, or I'm going to find a letter, or some evidence of another relationship. What I actually found was rows and rows of women's clothing, a scene that was like a cross between a love nest and a film set. With lights, editing equipment, probably something like 10,000 printed photographs, rows and rows and rows of videos, wigs, size 9 stilettos. It was just a whole emporium of these kind of goods.
It must have been a shock to you. You thought you was having an affair, and you found it.
Yes, and that's what I found. So someone asked me today, actually, whether I was sick, but I wasn't sick. I was shocked, and I stood there and I looked around me, and then my brain kicked in, and I loaded as much stuff as I could get into the boot of my car as evidence. And then I went around trashing the rest of the place in my own little way. I'm not very good. I'm not a very good trasher, but I knocked a few things over, and
well, you must have felt this was what was he was into it instead of you.
Absolutely, yes. He was making
competition,
starring in and selling what I realise now was predominantly sissy porn. I didn't know what it was then.
Is this forced feminization?
Yes, this, and you know, little Bo Peep out, because when I looked at it, I made myself look at some of the videos that I remember sitting on the floor in my lounge, and forced myself to watch them. I must have cried buckets of tears into my dog's fur that afternoon. But I made myself watch them because I thought, you need to know what you're dealing with here. And he'd been making some of this stuff in my home while I was out teaching.
God.
He really didn't have a shred of empathy or concern about anybody's feelings. But if his feelings were wounded in any way, God help anyone, you know?
The word narcissist is coming into my head.
I'm sure he was a narcissist. I'm sure he was narcissistic. I think he probably had very strong sociopathic tendencies. He was certainly a compulsive liar. He lied for fun. I mean, I'd see him do it. He would tell other people lies that I would know, well, that's a lie, but he would see how far he could push the lie to make other people believe it. And it was a form of entertainment for him. So,
yes, pretty nasty.
Okay.
Right. Wow. So, yes. That must have been a great shock. While all this was going on, and there was also presumably he was making the money to buy all this stuff. Let's just be quite clear. Was he paying his way in the relationship?
He told me he was
he doing his half of the bills and everything?
That all his businesses were doing badly, so he never paid a domestic bill all the time we were together. He sometimes paid if we went out anywhere, but I paid the bills. And the other thing that you should know is that I subsequently found out that he actually was a criminal. He was wanted by the police, and he had a criminal past.
What was he wanted for?
He was a con man. Well, con type offences, car type offences. I think at one point he was involved in a cut and shut operation in South London. But so he made money illegally. I think he was also operating as a fence out of one of his businesses. But I knew nothing about that at the time. I only found that out afterwards. And that was the reason I discovered that if I had a present, then it was often jewellery.
Yes, not carefully chosen for you, obviously. Right. Well, you should have all our sympathy, you know?
No. Well, you know, that's how it is.
That's how it is. That's how it was. Yes. Right. I'd like to move on now to Jackie, having taken you through having dropped out of school, had a horrible time as a child, and the only nurturing person was your grandma, really, who moved out when this horrible man moved in with your mum. And then you got off to university, you had a marriage, it didn't feel great, but on paper you had your house, your kids, your husband, and so on. Tell us then, Jackie, how did you meet the autogynephile man, and how did it all start?
Well, this was sort of early days of the internet when you could have like message boards.
Yeah.
And I was on this message board for music fans, basically, of like kind of like the original punk bands and some metal bands. And anyway, he was like part of that, and discovered that we knew, although he lived down south in England, he had travelled around following bands, and he'd been to Edinburgh, where I'm from, where I live. And we had not really mutual friends, but we knew people. We knew some of the same people. So that sort of like got us chatting. And, you know, then it became sort of more and more regular, and it kind of moved fairly quickly. you know, and I should have kind of saw that as a red flag. And this sort of like drawing out of intimacy. So I would tell him things about how unhappy I was, and it's about myself growing up, stuff about my own sort of confusion about parts of my sexuality. And anyway, he confided in me, you know, it's all very similar in a lot of ways. He confided in me about how he liked to sometimes dress in women's clothes, right? But this was something that when he told girlfriends about, they'd sort of been horrified, and that his parents had found out and they'd been horrified, and he sort of, you know, tried to suppress it, but like, you know, he didn't make it a kind of, he didn't go into the sexual side of it, you know, although he did say it was something that he felt he had to do because he just felt right when he did it. So I didn't really kind of understand it, but I felt sort of a bit, not honoured, but kind of like, you know, I felt, oh, he's telling me something so intimate that you can't tell anybody else. And then he was telling me that I was so special and unique and wonderful for not judging him and all that kind of stuff, you know. And so that fed into my own sense of like, I am a good person. I'm not this bad, horrible person that my mum always told me I was. I am a good person. So anyway, so we kind of developed a sort of like online affair. And it was all like, you know, this is the early days of internet, you know, like this was like, you know, I had no experience of anything like this. Anyway, so my then husband found out about this, and he was outraged, and I was so ashamed that when he said, you've got to leave, that I left. And I was because I was so ashamed of myself, that's what I did. And then there was
at this stage, had you actually met this man?
I'd met him once for like one day, but like that, but then sort of like the next day my husband found out about it, basically.
So it wasn't like you've been carrying on with this guy, you know, having a sexual affair with him for...
No, I wasn't having a sexual affair with him for a long time, no. Although I felt there was an intimacy there that wasn't there with my then husband.
Right.
You know, I felt like he knew me better and he gave me attention, and because my husband was very kind of like settled, like got the wife, got the kids, got the house. Yeah. That's me. Newspaper. Sunday, I'll just read the news, put my feet up, and then I'm still coming to deal with all the things that women often find themselves dealing with in a relationship with a man, like all the practicalities of life, all the kind of emotional management, all of that. I mean, he wasn't a bad man or anything, you know, but he was just kind of, boring. I'd become boring, yeah. I'd become just sort of like, you know, like his mum or something, you know. Yeah. So, but like, you know, the AGP, he made me feel, you know, alive and interesting and all these kind of positive things. So anyway, so my marriage broke up, and I went through like a few years where my ex-husband he showed a different side to himself, and he made it very difficult for me to have access to my children and things when they were really young, because they were like 4 and 2 when all this happened.
So when you left, Jackie, where did you go? I missed that question.
I went and stayed with a friend, and I stayed with her for nearly 6 months because I didn't have anywhere to go. Because I was still putting half of my salary into the joint account, because I saw that as like, oh, that's helping keep a roof over my kids' head and, you know, feed my kids.
So effectively, you're paying a lot of child support. Yeah,
well, it hadn't been kind of formally arranged or anything, but it left me with no money to actually pay rent or anything for myself. So anyway, after we got kind of finances more kind of fairly sorted out, I was really, really lucky to be offered a housing association flat, so that I was then able to like have the children over and stay overnight with me and things, you know. But I was still sort of like treated like a sort of babysitter, you know. Yeah. For my ex-husband. Anyway, like I won't go into all of that, but like when I got the flat, although the AGP was down south, it was then kind of moves like, oh, I could move up and I could be with you, you know, because I was telling him like how lonely I was and how much I missed my children, and you know, so then he moved up, and it was then the kind of reality, the real life of living with somebody who.
Did he move straight in with you then, Jackie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He moved straight up, and he moved up without a job. Now I expected him to get a job fairly quickly. He works in an industry where there's plenty of vacancies, plenty, you know, it's an engineering related field. But he didn't get a job for like 6 months.
Mm.
And then when he did, he took like a sort of contractor's job.
Ah.
So that he was like away a lot of the time. And he told me that, like, you know, oh, he didn't get paid, he wasn't getting paid regularly. It's not like he gets a monthly salary. So, because I had said, you know, after supporting him completely for 6 months, and when he got the job, I said, we could open a joint account and each put money in, and that all the bills can come out of there. And he was like, oh, I don't want a joint account. I had a joint account with a girlfriend. No. When you need something, just ask me. So he never paid a penny towards any bills or anything, although he would pay, like you said, Abigail, if we went out, he would pay, but that was because he was getting something out of it, you know? So no bills, no rent, nothing. And I had to ask him for money, which is demeaning. And so I would just try and sort of like eke out my salary. And by then, I had been so depressed during the time when I was breaking up from my husband and all this was happening that I had almost lost my job.
Wow.
Because I was taking so much time off. And so I changed my job, but was made part-time. So I had a smaller salary, and I was trying to keep everything afloat on that one part-time salary.
And how long did this go on for?
Years.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So you were financially exploited also for years and
yeah,
years.
I mean, I was, you know, so my money went on bills, rent, stuff for the kids, food, and that was it. There's no money for me to have any kind of, you know, bought new clothes or anything. You know, I was living as if I was like worse than being on benefits, really. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Meanwhile, he would sort of do things like, as time progressed, and like because I had said I was okay about him like dressing in women's clothes, he felt okay to go out and just spend loads and loads of money on women's clothes. And I remember one time he said, "Oh, meet me in the pub after work." So I was waiting there, and all I had was enough money for was half a pint of lager, and then I had something like £3 in my purse that I knew had to last me till I got paid. And I was sitting there thinking, right, I've got 2 more days, what can I buy? Right, well, I can get some bread. And I was thinking about all things like this, and he came in with this outfit that he brought out of Top Girl, is that what it's called? Top Shop. And it was this pink, bubblegum pink PVC mini skirt with a matching jacket, right? And it came to nearly £100.
Oh no.
And he was going, look, plus all these accessories and everything. He was, oh, look what I got. And he was really excited about it. And I was sitting there like, just that couple of minutes.
Afford a drink, yeah.
How am I going to feed us for 2 days off of £3? And I just, you know, I kind of like, you know, that was the kind of moment I thought, what is this? You know,
Yeah.
this is just so fucking unfair. So I would have regular arguments with him. It wasn't like I was completely, you know, like just putting up with this. I would have arguments with him, but he would get up the next morning as if nothing had happened and nothing would change. And eventually it just sort of completely wore me down, you know. And I mean, like there's still this thing in women that are in abusive relationships where you do still hear women saying like, "Oh, if that was me, I'd leave immediately." I saw one
Easy
today.
to say, isn't it? Easy to say.
I saw one. In fact, I saw one today. I screen capped it on my phone. Of like, oh, if I was in a relationship with one of these men, whew, I'd be away. You know, they don't kind of take into consideration some practicalities of the fact that like they just won't even go.
No,
You know.
right.
So anyway, like I suppose, did you want me to talk about like?
Let's because we're coming to the point now where it's bye-bye AGP time. So I'd like to stop now, go back to Abigail and go through that with her. And then, because you've got us very much to the fact that you wanted him to go, I'll come back
Right.
to you and you can tell us how you got rid of him. So is that okay, Abigail, if I come back to you now? And obviously, I imagine after you trashed his workshop and his collection,
Yeah.
he was pretty upset. So how did you do things? How did
So
things...
where do you want me to...
Yeah.
Okay, when I found out the truth. Okay, well, I need to tell you that in between the final stages of this all happening and me finding out the truth, my AGP, first of all, I'd become ill. I had a diagnosis of ME or CFS. And I had to take early retirement from my teaching job, lost my career. And he persuaded me to buy a pub and a restaurant. He wanted me to sell my home to finance this venture, but I refused to do that. I kept my home, thank God. But nevertheless, we bought the tenancy to a pub, and after he played landlord, you know, jovial mine host, for about 6 weeks, he just got bored with it and he left me to do the work. I had some staff, but not many, because I couldn't afford to get extra staff in, and of course it had the wonderful side effect of tying me down completely. I couldn't go anywhere because I was tied by the hours of the business. So when I went out that night and broke into his office, he was doing his one night a week behind the bar because it was my night off. That's how I knew that I could do that, because he couldn't get out for a change.
Yeah. Okay.
And I came back to him, and he knew where I'd been by the time I got back. He'd worked it out, and I sat on the other side of the bar and drank a large double brandy, and just sort of looked at him until all the customers had gone. And when the customers had gone, he burst into tears and pleaded with me for he was so sorry that it hurt me, and life was such a mess, and how could I possibly abandon him at this stage in things? And I was taken aback more by his tears than what I'd seen. By that time, I'd processed what I'd seen, but I couldn't get my head around the fact that I'm supposed to feel sorry for him.
I suppose.
And what happened was that after that, he pretty much disappeared from my life. He just kind of, first of all, he went to his businesses and he didn't come to the pub at all. So I was left with all this to do. And then he just disappeared from the locality. I didn't know where he was. I knew he was still around somewhere because people would say they'd seen him, but he just disappeared, as he'd done all along, for 3-4 days at a time. But this time he just didn't get in touch at all. So I was left with the pub and the restaurant to run. I had to keep it running. I had everything apart from my house tied up in that business. If I'd have just walked away from it, I would have lost everything. So with ME, I had to run that pub and restaurant for close on 2 years before I could sell it. And it was the worst two years of my life. I couldn't divorce him because I didn't know where he was. From time to time, I would get communications that always upset me. And I would hear what he was telling other people, which included things like he'd had to end the marriage because I'd been having a series of affairs with other men and he couldn't tolerate it anymore. He actually abandoned all his clothes. Now, as a man, he had a wardrobe 3 times the size of mine, but he just left all those clothes in my wardrobe. And actually, one day I bundled them all into bin liners and took them up to the forecourt of his car business about 9 o'clock in the morning, poured paraffin over them and set light to the lot, much to the entertainment of his sales team. And you know, I mean, I just did it because it made me feel better to see all that going up in smoke.
A little bit of revenge,
but
they're very small, a little drop.
But I didn't actually manage to track him down for 7 years. It was 7 or 8 years before I could actually pin him down and get divorced. And even then, he kept refusing to accept the papers, and it was a nightmare. So I had seven years, I guess, of rebuilding my health, my self-esteem, my entire life. I couldn't go back to teaching. I did eventually get to a place where I thought I'm pretty much cured of ME, but it was too late for teaching by then. I turned to writing and started writing, and that saved me. I mean that literally.
Yeah.
I don't think that I would have made it if I hadn't have been able to give myself the time to foster my own creativity.
And also it helps you process the stuff.
Well, interestingly, I have not until this last year written about this stuff. I've talked about it. I don't mind. I've been able to talk about it, but it's only in the last year that I've been able to actually approach it creatively. And now I'm working on a pamphlet of poems, which go under the working title of Some Parts Are Dangerous. Which is about this relationship. I'll probably never ever get it published. I'll have to publish it myself because the poetry world is awash with woke. But now it feels important for me to do it. Before, I never could. I couldn't approach it in a creative way. So I think that being able to come back to it and work with this material creatively now is actually a sign of the healing that I've done over the past 20 years. And it's taken 20 years.
It's a very long time to process it. You reach a level of insight and then something, and then you reach another level, and it's not finished until it's finished. Thanks very much for sharing all that with us. Much appreciated.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
It's 4 o'clock, but I'd like to come back to Jackie and finish off what's happened to Jackie and the rest of her life, how she got rid of the AGP, how she moved on, and so on, and any continuing processing that's happening, because, as I said, these things don't go away. They stay with you, and you're just looking at yourself and how you got yourself into it. And sometimes you have to give yourself a pat on the back as to how you got yourself out of it. So, Jackie, coming back to you, you've got to the point of him, he's still there. How did you get him to go? How long did it take?
Well, it took a long time, and increasingly feeling like I was living in some kind of episode of Jeremy Kyle or something. I want to say, like, I found that he was very secretive about his phone, okay? And when I finally sort of, like, had the opportunity to get a good look around, I discovered that, like, not only was, being an arse to me, but, like, he was online in dating rooms and stuff, like, looking for other women to indulge him in all of this. And I finally saw the sort of depth of his like porn obsession and his objectification of women, just as, you know, as an object, as a sexual object. And it was just so horrifying and disgusting that I was just even more determined to get rid of him, particularly when I saw that he had a sort of he had a secret Facebook profile, and he had all these young women that he was friends with, and he was lying to them and saying that he was a full-time transsexual, and that, you know, so of course, like, you know, engaging with their kind of like empathy and like wokeness, I suppose. And I just thought, you're just like a psychopath. You know, you're like dangerous. You just lie to everyone. And around about that time, I joined a women's reading group. And part of the reason I joined that was because he doesn't like reading, you know. So I thought, he will not want to come to this with me. Plus, it's a women-only group. Although he did try to come, and when I said, no, it's for women only, he said, but I am a woman. It's because I've got a penis, isn't it? And I almost burst out laughing, you know. And I was like, no, it's because you're a man. Because he wanted to be every part of my life, and I had no part of my life that was just mine anymore.
Yeah.
So anyway, through the it was a feminist reading group. We sort of, as part of the process, anybody who's been part of a reading group, you realise it's a sort of context to do a lot of consciousness raising.
Yeah.
So I was then sort of reconnected with women who were feminists and who I didn't tell straight away about what I was going through, because I was so full of shame.
Yeah.
I let myself get into this position. But when I did, you know, and it was sort of kind of, they were the first women I met who didn't try to say either that this is something I got myself into, that, and therefore, like, you know, try to victim blame me, or who said, oh, what's the big deal? You know, it's, you know, so what? And not kind of understand the kind of sheer insult it is for women, that men would behave this way. And it was really with their help that I became strong enough to really be resolute and not to go through the cycle of where I would tell him to go and then the next day he'd get up as if nothing happened. So one night I said to him, you really have to go. You've got 4 weeks. If you don't go, I'm going to pack all your things and throw them out. And then the next morning, I mean, he tried sort of crying and going like, oh, you know, how could you do this to me? Where am I going to go? And I was like, I don't care, just go. So the next morning, I sort of, by this time, he was in the bedroom. He pretty much lived in the bedroom like a lodger. And I never went in there. So I knocked on the door and I said, remember, you meant to be looking for a flat today. And I just kind of kept up that stone cold, you know, not an inch of giving in. And so after 4 weeks, he actually left. However, I did find out a few weeks later that he'd moved in with somebody else, and that this was some women he'd been possibly grooming for some time before. So he had left in his own time. You know, after all these years of me saying leave, he'd left when he'd found somebody to go and be a parasite off of.
Treat as he treated you, no doubt.
Yeah. So that was actually how he went. So, I mean, so I was still quite broken, but I had the support of women. And I'd been so cut off from women for so long because I didn't want to inflict him on other women. He would insist on, like, you know, if, like earlier in the relationship, if I was meeting with any female friends, he would insist on coming along. And I figured out that what was going on for him was that he was sort of like getting off on it slightly by sort of in his head thinking, oh, look at me, I've got all these female friends, I'm like a real girl. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I had kind of cut off friendships and just, you know, and after so many times of saying, you know, giving an excuse why you can't come out, people just stop asking. So I had gone from, I had nobody. So if it wasn't for the sort of sisterhood, sorry.
It's all right, Jackie. No, I can see why you would be upset. I can really see why you. Take a moment. If you turn your camera off, then we'll come back to you in a minute.
Okay. I'm okay.
You okay? Okay. Well, take a moment. You know, we all feel for you. We all could have been there. You know, we all could have been there.
No, it's fine. I just want to say, like women save me.
Well, that's good. That's what the sisterhood is for, and we want to publicise your experiences, and we're grateful to you for sharing them, so that we start to educate our daughters to be a little bit more analytical about their relationships with men, a little bit more aware of how sexist society is, and without, you know, making them want to hide away and never go out. We want them to be tooled up to assess their relationships and to proceed gradually with them, and to feel they've got circles of support within the sisterhood, within their peer group, within their feminist godmothers and aunties and all the women of all the ages that they know, so that they can talk to people about these things when they start, and they can get out of them a lot quicker than you both were able to. That's what we're doing this for. We're doing it for the girls.
I mean, I just want to say that, like, you know, how awful it is that this whole idea of like gender identity,
Of course it is.
How poisonous it is, and how, you know, I see young women in particular being completely swept up in this. Not just sort of like so they want to transition themselves, but like, how does a girl who is in a relationship with one of these men ask for help? I couldn't ask for help.
No.
You know, because I would either get like, you know, either victim blamed or told that like, oh, it was no big deal, or they would take his side. And that was like, you know, years ago. So how does it's even worse now? How do girls get help? How do they get support when all their peers, you know, they're terrified of appearing transphobic? I mean, like, what is going on?
It's crazy, and often it's circles of women like ourselves who've been through experiences or who've looked into the issues and realised, you know, what a horrendous bubble it is. They're the only people. Sometimes they find us, a lot of deep transitioners have found the feminists, haven't they, and got support there. So it's very important that we work together to educate ourselves and to be there and give ourselves a profile, so that some of the young women that have been through these awful experiences can find us to talk to when they need to. I think it's a very, very important point. So thanks for that. I'd like to just have a little look at the chat now. I know I don't want to talk too much about your children. I know both of you have got children, and obviously it's not for you to identify them. But if you could talk in general terms, somebody's asked a question about what was the effect on your children of the autogynephile behaviour over all those years. And I'm going to give you a moment, Jackie, and I'm going to come to Abigail. If you'd be happy to answer that question first, please, Abigail. I think you might need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, is that better?
Yeah, that's
I'm
better.
very happy to talk about it because my daughter's grown now, obviously, and she's very happy. But it did affect her. She's not his daughter, but she had already been abandoned by her father when she was 3, 4, which had affected her, as you might imagine. And when my AGP came into my daughter's life, he kind of groomed her as well. He presented himself as a nice, friendly man who would be her father figure. He was a competitive motor racing person. And so he took her racing sometimes. He taught her how to change a wheel. He took photographs of her with his high-ab lorry. And she really bought into the idea that he was going to be her daddy. But when she hit puberty, and I think in retrospect this is an important point, his attitude towards her changed completely, and he became nasty. She couldn't do anything right. He tried to set up a situation where I had to choose between her and him, in the most dreadful way. And obviously the impact on what I was going through all that years impacted on her. So she was damaged indirectly, if you like. I make no suggestion that there was anything beyond that, although there was some talk that he was under observation for offences with other minors, that I found out again after the event. But I believe that those minors were male children rather than female. But the emotional and psychological damage on my daughter was considerable, and so it added to issues that she already had.
And I suppose it was a second abandonment, wasn't it, from being friendly daddy to being...
Yes, exactly. You know, so she has had her own trust issues with men, and I'm pleased to say that she is with a very nice man now, and she's expecting her first babies.
Congratulations on your forthcoming grandmotherhood. Very nice.
Yes, so that has a happy ending, but it was a difficult time for her, and I feel guilty about that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's great. Jackie, would you like to tell us about how this? I realised that your children weren't living with you necessarily at the time.
Yeah, they didn't live with me full time, but eventually I ended up having sort of custody of them, sort of proper shared custody. So they stayed with me, you know, around about half the time. A bit like Abigail, the effect wasn't direct; it was more indirect because of like how I was affected, really. And I did try to sort of protect them from all of this, but children have a way of knowing if their mother is unhappy. With him, it was kind of, I've got a boy and a girl, and the boy's younger than the girl. With the girl, I can cringe at some of the things looking back now, and I realise what was going on for him. Like, for example, when she was about 10 or 11, she was having a sleepover at her dad's house with two or three friends, and the AGP said, "Oh, I'll take you all out for pizza before you go over to your dad's for your sleepover." And I thought, "Oh, that's nice, you know, treating my daughter's friends to." So I went along as well. And then he gave them all a sleepover bag, like a bag with gifts in it. And there was things like sort of makeup kits and things like that. Now, these were like 10, 11-year-old girls. I don't think it was appropriate to give them that. And he hadn't consulted me on anything this. But you like to sort of think he was sort of like part of this, like, you know, oh, girlies, you know, it was like, so I thought it was kind of
ready-made friendship group.
Sorry?
Ready-made friendship, ready-made validation group.
Yeah, and also like, you know, like not understanding, like, these were children, you know what I mean? They're not little prototype little adolescents. They weren't interested in makeup and stuff, you know. They were like, she was a kid.
I would be furious if given my daughter makeup at that age.
So he would kind of push femininity on my daughter. And with my son, who is like his own father, not interested in sport, not a boyish boy, but not a girly boy either, but a quiet, gentle, you know, slightly withdrawn, whatever. He would sort of like try and say to him, like, "Oh, you got to come to the football with me. We'll go and watch football," and try and push masculinity on him, you know, and had no kind of like, wasn't treating the children as individuals, you know. And he would give them, like, you know, what to them was a lot of money. He would give them £10 pocket money each every week, okay? And then one day
when you had no money.
When I had no money, yeah. And then one day my son, who was afraid of the dark, was scared to go to the toilet because the hall light wasn't working. And so the AGP guy started, oh, come on, don't be such a wuss. Go get to that. And so my son, who was maybe about 7 at the time, started crying. He's going, what are you doing? And I was like, leave him alone. Leave him alone. And so we had this kind of confrontation. And from then I thought, I have to protect my children from this man. And so then he said to me, like, well, if I'm not allowed to tell them what to do, they're not getting any pocket money anymore.
Oh, God. Emotional blackmail.
So I said, fine, don't. So the kids adjusted to that, and they were never quite the same with him ever again after that.
Well, they learned, haven't they?
When he eventually left, my daughter said to me after like a week or so, she said, it's nice to have you back, Mummy.
Oh.
You know.
Yeah. Because you must have been preoccupied. I mean, just
I
all
was
the work you had to do.
I felt dead inside. I had no room. So I've managed over time, I think, to build healthy relationships with my children. I'm very close to my daughter. She's in the room next door. You probably saw her. We're very close, you know, and she's able to like speak to me. She's in a relationship with a nice guy, I think, but we have a kind of closeness that I never expected to get because I didn't have any relationship with my own mother. I feel very blessed. So, yeah, so that's where I am.
You've got to give yourself a lot of credit for creating that with your daughter when you didn't have it handed down to you by your own mother. That always amazes me, that women can create these lovely, warm relationships when they were never given that by their own mother. I think that's an amazing achievement. Thanks very much for sharing that.
Okay.
There's a question that's come up from an anonymous attendee who's I think answered their own question. They're saying that just trying to scroll back a bit. I'm saying, my partner says he's trans, but is he AGP? But I think this person has or maybe somebody else has answered, there is no such thing as transgenderism, there is just men. And somebody else has said that although the focus of this webinar is AGP, the behaviour is just classic patriarchal male intimate perpetrator behaviour. And I think that rings a lot of bells. There's so many forms of ways in which you can abuse and use a woman. But I don't know if either of you would like to comment on you know, what's the distinction or the overlap between AGP and trans? Are you waving, Jackie? Can we hear from you?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, Abigail come in as well. I think that right. The thing about it being classic patriarchal abuse, yes it is, because it's yet another. You know, men get the world the way they want the world to be, including telling us what a woman is. Okay. But it's got a very specific flavour to it because of the object, you know, like the way that it's manifested, and the kind of sexualized part of it, you know. The crossover with trans, my ex, I call him my ex-torturer. My ex-torturer at one point said he was a woman, like, you know, and I was like, oh, I've got to find out so much more about this. So I joined an online support group. It was meant to be for women with cross-dressing husbands. And it's called My Husband Betty. Don't go there, ladies, don't go there. And it was very apparent that, like, men were starting off as cross-dressers and then discovered that they were actually transgender. And it was really just a means of them living their fantasy, you know, 24/7, you know, and getting a pass on that because it's no longer like some kind of fetishistic obsession. You're now, you know, you've got a label, it's a political label, you've got a, you know, you've got a condition, you've got, like, you know, rights and all the rest of it. So I think for a lot of these men who say they're trans and have come through this kind of cross-dressing sort of route, they're just the same men, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's such a thing as an innate gender identity. I think it's just a bunch of stereotypes that some individuals get hung up on.
Yeah.
So I don't really make a distinction. I suppose you can make a distinction between men who do this and just leave women the fuck alone, and men who don't. You know, that's the only distinction I make.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm just going to click. I'm not very good at this, Sue. I'm going to click. This is Sarah. I'm going to click on answer live to you, Sarah, to see if you want to say anything more about that. Would you like to unmute yourself, Sarah, and say something? I'm taking that as a no. No, I don't think Sarah does want to. Anyway, thank you. It's a very good point. Thank you very much. Abigail, would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, because you see, I'm got the favourable position really of coming to this 20 years ago, before being trans and brave and stunning was even really an option. And my ex, the one thing I will say for him that was, after I found out the truth, I pinned him down and I made him talk to me about it. I said, you know, I deserve a bit of honesty here. And during that period, he admitted to me that he had started this trajectory towards where we got, that I told you about. He said that it started with him masturbating using his older sister's underwear in early adolescence, and that it developed through a lifelong relationship with porn, culminating with porn on the web. And I think that this is why we're seeing such a massive explosion in AGP behaviour. It's because they're learning it.
Yeah.
Boys are learning it even before they reach manhood.
I'm glad you said that. It's horrible, but I'm so glad you pointed out the link between porn. Porn is like a recipe book for a young man, how to develop your sexuality, isn't it? In a horrendous way.
And my husband admitted this to me. He also said to me, and this I think is very telling, that he did not under any circumstances want to be a woman. He wanted, he made it very plain that his penis was the center of the universe, and that it was far too important to him to consider sacrificing it. But he did repeatedly say that he wished he could have breasts. And if then had been now, who's to say? He could have.
Yeah.
You know, he could have made that jump because, as Jackie says, there are important advantages now that didn't exist then.
Yeah.
So I don't know. He's probably too old to make that jump now. But
has he got the money? That's probably more the question, isn't it? Because someone would always tell you this.
Well, no. I mean, I found out recently that he's got another woman in his grip at the moment, who may or may not know anything about his activities. I mean, I feel sorry for her, but what can you do? So I think that I personally, and that's just my view, that most of the transgender explosion are AGP. There are a few dysphorics who are genuinely dysphoric and who feel that they need to progress to some kind of surgery, which is a really radical surgery. But if you're dysphoric, you do not celebrate the penis in the body that you're supposed to be rejecting. That is totally...
And there is absolutely no necessary link between that and exploiting and using and lying to and harming.
No, so I mean,
hurting anybody. Yeah.
My present partner spent his life as a psychiatric nurse. He's a double qualified nurse, and he has treated and supported both dysphorics and AGP men. And there is there was a clear difference between those two conditions. Sadly, what they've done in mental health circles has smudged the distinction, and I think that we're picking up a lot of problems because of that.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd say.
Thank you both very much. I'm afraid I'm going to have to close it here. I would love to have some more contributions, but there's just a few things I need to say in closing before we say goodbye, because it's all taken longer than I thought, but it's been absolutely fascinating. And thank you for all the points that have been coming up in the chat and in the questions. Thank you for attending. Our next Objectinar is next Sunday at 3 o'clock, when we will be interviewing Heather Brunskill-Evans about her career in feminism. She was on the Moral Maze and said that transing children is abuse. For that, she was trolled by the Women's Equality Party and expelled by them, even though she'd been elected to office. So please tune in for that one. We could do with some help on some of our project publicity and lots of things, so please get in touch to volunteer if you have any time. Please remember to sign the Women's Declaration if you haven't already. And please do, if you've got any ideas about how we can translate this into some feminist education for mothers on raising girls who are aware of the dangers in this world and able to realistically assess relationships without making them so terrified that they hide away and never go near a relationship, then we've got a few ideas of our own. It would be interesting to develop that into something and have a session on raising feminist daughters in the next week or two. I've also been talking to the wonderful Jennifer Bielek about coming and doing a webinar with us. Jennifer is the one who did the research on the money behind the transgender movement and made it clear to everybody that this is not a grassroots movement, it's a rich man's movement. Oh, we've got time for one last question. I don't think we have. We've got 3 minutes. Let's just clicking on. Angela says, thanks for sharing. We've also put up in the chat the links to Abigail's and Jackie's ongoing work on this. There are places to go. You can contact us to put you in touch, or you can look for Tinsel Angels group, which the Trans Widows group. Tinsel have been here. We haven't really had a chance to bring her in, but we'd love to talk to her. And there is also a group for the children or stepchildren of autogynephiles as well. So help is available. If you look for it, you don't have to go to all the trans Kool-Aid organisations. So thank you all very much for participating. We didn't get to stop at 4 o'clock. We carried straight on, but I hope you found it as fascinating and wonderful as I am. And I have to say, it's amazed but me, having heard what you've both been through, together and compost. And there you are, living, loving and working and living successful feminist lives and helping the sisterhood so wonderfully. So thank you all very, very much indeed. And I hope to talk to you all next time.
Did we do well, my darling girls? Did we really do well? We grew you up to be straight and strong, to do your best to know right from wrong. But we grew you in this awful world, a world that's hard and tough for girls. And part of your strength was to take it and make it okay. But it's not okay, my darling girls, in this fucked up mother.